Thank you so much, everybody. Good evening, everybody, and many thanks for joining us tonight for this event held to mark the centenary of the birth of Fionnlagh Iain MacDhòmhnaill, Finlay J. Macdonald. The centenary has already been commemorated in different ways. There were screenings of Macdonald's films organized in Lewis and Harris. BBC Alaba and Radio Nan Gaelic produced new programs and made older programs, including those that Macdonald made himself, available again. And in April, we held a small event under the auspices of Common Gaelic Glasgow, the Glasgow Gaelic Association with Thomas McAlpine, and we discussed Macdonald's writing. And it was thanks to this event that we got in touch with other researchers interested in different aspects of Macdonald's work and also with the Macdonald family. And thus the idea for this event came about in order to broaden the discussion and the audiences as well. The event is going to be recorded and made available online, so I hope everybody is fine with that. And I'm very grateful that we can hold the webinar under the auspices of the International Association for the Study of Scottish Literatures, Common Eternation ta Erson Scrutek Lichtreches na Halaba. And it is a great honor that members of the Macdonald family are with us tonight. And before I introduce the speakers and the program, I'd like to invite them to say a few words to open the event.
Who would you like to speak, Petra?
Whoever Ekido is happy to do it. So Ekido, just to introduce the family members, we have with us Kathleen MacDonald, Finlay MacDonald, and Gilly MacDonald. And Ekido, it is indeed an honor that you are all present and with us for the event.
Well, we'd just like to say thank you so much, Petra, for organising all this, and we're really excited to hear everything that's going to be said around the round table about my father's work. That's about, yeah, really excited about this.
Thank you so much, Finlay, and I can do many thanks to the whole family who have been so supportive of these recent attempts to encourage more research on the Finlay J's work.
Can I just add something? You know, I was a child when Gurram started. I was a baby when Gurram started, and a teenager when a lot of his documentaries and programs were going out on television. But it's only this year, really, with the things that have been happening, that I've learned to appreciate as an adult the work that he was doing, and it's been fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what people say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, right. Kathleen here. I first heard Finlay J's voice when I was 12 years old in the west side of Lewis, listening to Gaelic radio programs. And we all were fascinated by the programs that Finlay was doing in those days, because Gaelic radio was quite new then. And I remember, first of all, thinking, what a wonderful broadcasting voice, except that at the age of 12, I didn't realize you called it a broadcasting voice. And listening to what he had to say, the content of these programs was so fascinating, even to a 12-year-old. And I remember, and this is why it sticks in my mind so much, my father, we were all listening, and my father said at the end of the broadcast, "Oh, well, ha Finlay J ma." And I remember thinking, ha Finlay J ma. And it has stuck with me since then. So from then on, of course, I was aware of this wonderful voice and broadcaster.
That would have been, what, 1960?
Oh, no, earlier than that. Oh, my goodness, no, I'm talking about, no, 1954.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1954.
Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Yes, 54, 1954, yeah.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for sharing that with us. And I hope that as we go on and when we get to the general discussion, that we will have more time and space to share personal memories, stories. I believe we have some people in the audience who knew Finlay J too personally. So I very much look forward to that. And thank you so much for being with us tonight. Mila, thank. So we should now be back with the slideshow. We have already had the two welcomes, and I'm going to follow with a brief introduction because we tried to advertise this event quite widely. And although, as most of you knew Finlay J. MacDonald in person or have been interested in his work, that won't be very new to you, but we thought it would be appropriate to introduce him and his career. And then we are going to have 3 talks, not 4, unfortunately, because we have lost Thomas McAlpine due to a family emergency. I tried to make up for his absence by expanding the introductory part of it, although it, of course, cannot replace Thomas's insights and his knowledge. I suggest that we will go through all the talks first, then stop the recording and have a general discussion. As I said initially, please, for the talks, keep your microphones off. And then we can have them on for the discussion again. And we can also be using the chat function for sharing questions, comments, and links. So first, a bit of introduction. Finlay J. MacDonald was born on the 4th of July of 1925 in Scarista in the Isle of Harris. And he died on the 14th of October 1987 in Dunbartonshire. He was educated at the Portree High School, and this is where his literary enterprises start. He became the first ever editor of the magazine An Cabarnach, which was published by the Portree branch of Common na Hoikri. I believe that what we see on the slide, which is one of his editorials from June 1944, is one of the earliest examples of his writing in print and in Gaelic. In 1944, he came to the University of Glasgow and he was studying with the view of becoming minister, but events took a different turn. The following explanation of what happened comes from a short profile of Finlay J. MacDonald, which appeared in Gerem. And it was written by Alistair Iain MacDhòmhnaill, and I believe it was written with the direct participation of Finlay J. MacDonald himself. And I translated this passage from Gaelic into English. So in 1944, he, meaning Finlay J. MacDonald, headed for the University of Glasgow, and he was fully hoping to enter the ministry. But unfortunately, as he says himself, he was led astray and he left everything behind the next year to go and help Hugh McPhee from the BBC with the Gaelic programs. At that point, he was the youngest employee at the BBC working in such a role. And it was the beginning of a very impressive career. The following quote comes from a dissertation by Donald John MacLeod, a fellow Harrisman, and I will be referring to his work throughout because it is a priceless source of information about 20th century Gaelic literature. So this is what Donald John MacLeod says. Hugh McPhee was BBC's Scotland's sole Gaelic producer between 1935 and 1945, when Finlay J. MacDonald became his assistant. MacDonald was replaced in 1954 by Fred Macaulay, who succeeded McPhee as head of the department in 1964. On the slide, you can see Finlay J. MacDonald's career progression at the BBC, and it was indeed an impressive career. He was involved in a number of programs, and we will be hearing more about his documentaries that he made for the BBC in the 1960s from Mhairi in her talk. He was involved in Gaelic programs, including Songs All the Way and Maggie's Milk and many others. When it comes to his writing, he was very active in both Gaelic and English. He wrote short stories, he wrote humorous prose tales, he produced some travel writing, which is very interesting, and he was a prolific journalist, writing editorials and columns, and he, of course, wrote a number of film and radio program scripts. The books he's probably most famous for today are his 3 memoirs that describe his upbringing in Harris between the 2 world wars. He also published an edition of Samuel Johnson's Journey to the Western Isles with his own photographs and commentaries. I mentioned the BBC, Gaelic and Weekly Scotsman as some of the media platforms that he was using to publish or broadcast his writing. I wanted to say a bit more about Weekly Scotsman in particular, because I believe it is a resource of MacDonald's both Gaelic and English writing that has not been studied at all. And I've been looking at it only recently. In 1956, Finlay J. MacDonald took over a column on Highland and Gaelic affairs, which had been appearing in Weekly Scotsman previously. The first author was Hector MacDougall, and then he was followed by Fergus McIntosh. When Finlay J. MacDonald started to write the column, he kept the pattern of alternating Gaelic and English regularly. On the slide in the top corner, you can see the introduction. When he published his first column. When it comes to topics that he covered in this column, he wrote about Gaelic initiatives, he wrote about Scottish and international politics, he discussed education, religion, he contributed several humorous autobiographical pieces. And he also wrote about international affairs, including developments in Northern Ireland and in Hungary. The other example that you see on the slide, Láv a Chutechi, the helping hand, is his commentary on the developments in Hungary in 1956. So that's a remarkable piece indeed. Moreover, appearing on the same page as Finlay J. MacDonald's column was another one by Sidney Goodsir Smith, who, as can be expected, wrote mostly about Scots affairs and was advocating for Scots language in the public life and in literature. During this webinar, we will come across several other connections between Finlay J. MacDonald and Sidney Goodsir Smith. Now, to introduce one of Finlay J. MacDonald's main contributions to Gaelic journalism and Gaelic literature, it is the foundation of the Gaelic quarterly magazine Garam, which MacDonald started with Derek Thompson. The first issue appeared in 1952, and the magazine kept appearing regularly for the impressive period of 50 years. It provided an important platform for new Gaelic writing, for discussions of current affairs in Scotland and abroad. It published reviews of new writing, not only in Gaelic, but in other languages, translations from other languages into Gaelic. It showed a consistent interest in fellow Celtic countries, in continental Europe, and indeed in the whole world. And it was very supportive of people who learn Gaelic, both in Scotland and abroad. On the slide, you can see a delightful cartoon of the 2 founding editors by Morven Cameron, which appeared in the very first issue. So that's Finlay J. MacDonald and Derek Thompson, Nafir Chesahi. When it comes to MacDonald's own contributions to Garam, he was involved in providing the editorials. These were mostly co-written with Derek Thompson. Garam also published several of his short stories and humoristic pieces, and we will be hearing more about these from Rob Dunbar shortly. He also published several pieces inspired by his travels, one about Northern Ireland, one about France and Spain, and one about Iceland. He was a prolific reviewer. And for the review section in Garam, he covered new publications by Compton Mackenzie, Neil Gunn, Sidney Goodsir-Smith, Robin Jenkins, Ian Crichton-Smith, so these major names of Scottish literature. But he also wrote about fiction by Boris Pasternak, or about the writing of the Irish actor, translator, and activist Micheál Mac Liammóir. He contributed two extensive series of articles, one consisting of portrayals of remarkable people in the Gaelic world, including Duncan Livingstone, Kenneth MacLeod, Ian Moffat-Pender, Neil Shaw, all these important figures in Gaelic literature and culture, and the other series was about Gaelic choirs. And finally, Garam published his translations of two poems by Boris Pasternak, so somebody he was really interested in throughout. And because Thomas is unfortunately not with us tonight, I wanted to draw your attention to this wonderful resource. Many of you will know it, but the Digital Archive of Scottish Gaelic, DASC, based at the University of Glasgow, has put together Garam Erloine, Garam Online, which is an online database freely accessible of all the content and contributors to Garam over the period of 50 years. And the first 10 volumes covering the period from 1952 to 1962. And these are the years when Finlay J. MacDonald was most involved in the magazine. All these have been digitized, so you can read them online for free if you wish. So I recommend the resource very much. Now, to mention Finlay J. MacDonald's short stories, so far I have been able to locate 4 of them, and the first 2 on the slide are new discoveries, and the first one I made only recently, thanks to information from the MacDonald family. The story Anashalach was published in the bilingual Gaelic English anthology Alava in 1948, but under the pseudonym Goram Mulherich. But once you know it is Finlay J, it is absolutely obvious from the style and the humor. The other one, called Ambassar, was included in the anthology Kriech and Ura, which mostly brought together prose and poetry from Garam. But this story, interestingly enough, never appeared in the magazine itself, only in this anthology. And the other 2 are much more famous. They appeared in Garam itself, and especially Bielif Antloy has gained much praise from critics. So Donald Joe MacLeod was of the opinion that it is as powerful a story as any that has appeared in Gaelic. And Maury Watson, in his introduction to Gaelic fiction, wrote that it's one of the most poignant of the early Garam stories, and that no other story of the period conveys emotion so powerfully or convincingly. And now this is the end of the introductory part, and I will be handing over to our first speaker, Rob Dunbar from the University of Edinburgh. Rob currently holds the chair of Celtic at the University of Edinburgh. His research focuses on language policy and planning, on Gaelic literature and culture and society from the late 18th century to the early 20th century, and on Gaelic in Canada. He is currently working on Gaelic autobiographical writing and Gaelic humour, as well as on the completion of a biography and literary assessment of the Tiree Nova Scotian poet John MacLean, and he is preparing a scholarly edition of his secular song poems. But for tonight, Rob will share with us his observations on the topic of humour in Finlay J. MacDonald's Gaelic writing.
Sure, okay, well, thank you very much, Petra, for including me in tonight's proceedings, and it's a great pleasure and indeed an honor to be with you tonight to talk about humor in Finlay J's Gaelic prose. I'd like to sort of set the context by talking about humor in the Gaelic tradition more generally. As Petra has said, I've done a fair amount of work on elements of Gaelic humor recently, some of which is coming to fruition very shortly. But one of the two reasons why I took an interest in humor is, first of all, in my experience of Gaelic culture, unsurprisingly, it's central to the culture, central to all human cultures, really. And yet very little scholarly attention has been given to humor, not only humorous writing, but humor in general. So I think it's an inherently interesting topic, and one that's generally not received a great deal of attention outside of some scholarly work on satirical poetry. Obviously, there's a very strong tradition of humor in the Gaelic oral tradition, from pieces of Gaelic oral narrative, which are humorous. And at the end of my short presentation tonight, I'll actually turn to one such example that was saved for us thanks to Finlay J, to stories of wise fools, to tall tales, repartee, some of which has made its way into print, but a great deal of this material is the sort of humorous material that's part and parcel of day-to-day life in Gaelic communities and has escaped even being recorded. There is, of course, a very long tradition of satirical poetry and other forms of humorous verse. But with the development of a Gaelic prose literature in the 19th century, humorous prose writing begins to emerge. We see certainly elements of humor in the new, in the 19th century context, the new Gaelic literary form of the prose conversation, or the cárag, which our friend and colleague Sheila Kidd has done so much to explore and to bring to a wider audience through her editorial work as well as her own scholarship. In the late 19th century, we begin to see the emergence of writers who whose work contains strongly humorous elements. I'm thinking here particularly of Donald McCachnie of Jura. In the 20th century, the Reverend Donald Lamont and his portraits of the imaginary parish of Killiscumain come to mind. Slightly, ever so slightly satirical, like McCachnie, a very keen eye for human foibles and frailties. I'm also thinking of writers such as Johana MacLeod, who for many years wrote under the pen name Alasdair Mór in a column in the Stornoway Gazette, Lítear Bearnarai. Then Garam itself did a great deal to ensure the development of a humorous Gaelic prose literature, not least through Finlay J, who I'll take a closer look at in a moment, but other writers such as Donald Morrison, the poet and writer Norman MacLeod and Bars the Bach, and Donald Alistair MacDonald, Donald Alistair, among many others in the pages of Garam. With the emergence of the autobiography, a relatively late emerging form of Gaelic literature, really only in the 1970s do we begin to see the emergence of autobiographies in Gaelic. But Angus Campbell and Pullen's remarkable Suag Riama Grua is filled with the sort of conversational, humorous banter and observations that one would expect when visiting in the pub, in the Cayley House, and so forth. Similarly, in John MacLeod's memoir, written by Finlay, my memory's failing me right now. Ghost-written account of Sullivan is filled with humorous material. And more recently, John Alec Macpherson's autobiography had richly humorous elements to it as well. So in the autobiography, we really see the presence of humor. And as Meg Bateman has pointed out, in many of the best autobiographies, the closeness to the world of orality is very clear. And I think that's something that's a feature of Finlay J's writing as well. And then, of course, we have other humorous writing from the likes of Murdo Matheson, Cailleach and Deacon, the unforgettable cross-dressing character that Murdo Matheson of Lewis created. In Ian Crichton's short story, or story, Murachug, we have a great deal of humor. And we find the same in other more contemporary writers such as Angus Peter Campbell, Norman MacLean, Mariana Ní Gabháil, in the short stories of Duncan Gillis. And all of this raises the question which I'm struggling with, which is whether there's a distinctively Scottish Gaelic humorous tradition. And I think that there are elements of this that can be found. And I think that we see that Finlay J sits firmly at the center of this humorous tradition. His first attempts at writing and editing, as Petra has already pointed out, are in An Capanach, a publication of Portree High School, which Finlay J edited the first edition of in 1944. He wrote the leader, and all of this is my rough translation of the Gaelic originals, but gives us a sense of what his part of what his writing project and editing project is. He wrote that if the following pages help those of you who take a look at them while away a wet afternoon, or if they bring a smile to your face, good. In the second edition of An Capanach, a year later in June 1945, contained a letter to Eli, who had taken over at An Capanach, addressed Hillhead, Glasgow, where he was a student at the time. He writes, "I have been expecting to send you a short line for a while now, but it has not been easy, seeing how I've been in a panic with university studies, botany and Gaelic, Greek and geology, and more balderdash than I've ever heard or seen. Poor soul, you should be thankful that Providence has left you in Portree." Sense of his humorous style. So as Petra mentioned, there are four pieces of particular note that appeared in Garam. Then Ambazar, which appeared in the collection Criochan Ure and Shalig that she mentioned. And I want to mention an item that he collected rather than he wrote, but I'll come back to at the very end. A relatively short piece which appeared in volume 11 of Garam in 1955, Aneiche vai Shilig of Rachan, to which I'll return in a moment. What are some of the characteristics of his humorous style? First of all, there's a closeness to the language and style of conversation and of banter and of exchange that might find in a house visit or in the pub or in any other formal gathering of Gaelic speakers. The language is informal, conversational, highly idiomatic Gaelic is used, and often the presence of humorous turns of phrases, some of which are less easy to translate into English. We have sharply drawn characters, and in them a close observation of the tics of behavior, of human foibles. There are strongly satirical elements and strongly self-deprecating elements as well. And the picture that emerges in some of the humorous writing is of, in the case of some of the self-deprecating material, of simple rural people set loose in an urban context or in an unfamiliar context. And there is about this writing an element of self-mockery, but there's also an element of mockery of the stereotypes of the Gael, of the rural people, and always a sense that the author, and by implication Gaels more generally, are not quite so innocent as they and others make out, and as he is more than happy to portray in some of the writings. And at times, certainly a delight and a sense of the absurd that's very well developed. And I think in all of these respects, his writing is very much of a piece with other Gaelic humor, not only humorous prose, but Gaelic humor more generally. And I thought I'd give a few examples from some of these pieces, again in loose translation or rough translation. From Ankar, for example, the story of how Finlay J ended up purchasing a car that he had no intention of buying and really didn't have the finances to purchase, but was convinced by a very effective salesperson who slightly oversold the virtues of the car. Some of the weaknesses of the car were only found out after about 50 miles of travel into the Scottish Highlands. And he gets out of the car in his kilt and decides that he is going to repair it, although he feels ill-equipped to do so. Now, there are those on whom the Creator has bestowed amazing talents. They can take a watch apart and then put it back together again. They can make a radio out of a jam jar, and they can saw a piece of wood as straight as an arrow with their eyes closed. We were never one of those people, but we were always eager to try. In a piece called Gleichgus Nangail, the wisdom of Nangal, I should say, the wisdom of the lowlander. He begins by saying, there is no sensible man or even a woman who doesn't know that the Gaels as a people are very backward. We have known this for a long time, but we never understood why until Alistair MacDonald of Bornish put his finger on the crux of the matter in a letter that he sent to us at Gadam about the rockets in South Uist. This was in the 1950s, of course, when the rocket range was being established in South Uist, and it was the cause of considerable comment, including in the pages of Gadam. Too much Gaelic. That's what's wrong. In the piece Gleichgus Nangail, he observes that as Gaels are gifted with second sight, they would do very well in football pools, and suggests that a feature on football pools be introduced into Gadam. And at the end of his story, he gives Gaelic names to various Scottish clubs pitted against local Highland League clubs, except for Rangers. He doesn't translate Rangers into any form of Gaelic. His comment is that Rangers have gone so far off the boil recently that there's no word in Gaelic for them. In his short story, Stochganen, which contains rich vocabulary in terms of knitting, which any knitting aficionados may wish to consult. He begins by saying, although there is usually a few inches between them, you would hardly believe the connection that there is between the kilt and stockings. In a survey we have recently undertaken to find out why more people are not wearing the kilt, we received answers such as this. A young lad quickly replied, "Kilt stockings are so expensive compared to ankle socks." A man said, "The kilt is so heavy on stockings. If a hole appears in the heel of my stocking, I'm disgraced. If a hole appears in the heel of my socks and I'm wearing trousers, all I have to do is loosen my braces an inch or two, and I can get away with wearing the socks for 2 or 3 more days without anybody noticing the hole." In the story, The Bazaar, about the local minister in Harris wishing to introduce a bazaar, the female character comes home and asks her husband, "Alistair, what's a bazaar?" Commenting, Alistair had worked at the hydro at Canich in the Highlands for 2 years, and there's nothing he doesn't know. He looked up from the Fionnlagh, the newspaper he was reading. "Bazaar," he said. "If you had read the Gazette, you'd know what it is. Isn't it a great, dreadful communion service of the sort they had in Stornoway last year?" "That's exactly what I was thinking," she said. "Well, we're going to have one here too, and unless I'm far wrong, we will have a house full of people." And with that, I remembered the potatoes on the boil, and I went down to the other end of the Croft House, and we didn't say another word about the bazaar. Finally, as I mentioned, there is a piece in Garam 11 called Anaiche va Shilig of Rochan, the evening that it was raining porridge. And I immediately recognized this because I knew a version of this story that had been told and recorded by Johana MacDhòmhnaill, the famous Gaelic storyteller. And if I may, I will try to play a bit of his version of this story. We'll see whether this works. Stop me if you can't hear it, Petra.
Rob, at the moment, I don't think we are hearing anything, or at least I'm...
Yeah, I had that problem earlier today. Anyhow, I thought I'd play a little bit of it. Johana, the story that Johana told was about an old woman, a Bountroch, a widow, who had a mentally deficient son. The mentally deficient son she had sent him to town to sell their only cow. And in return for the cow, the young man had sold it. And the clever packman who had purchased the cow had paid him by essentially putting a bit of spit in the poor young man's hand, which he then lost while crossing a brook. The widow, of course, was perturbed by this, and the son was sent back out to kill the packman. The woman, while the son returned home, the woman from the upper story of the house took a pot of porridge and started tossing it around the house and on her son as he came in. When he was later questioned about the disappearance, he said that he remembered the night very well and that he had killed the packman on the evening that it was raining porridge. And the story goes on. So I was familiar with this story. And a similar version had been recorded by Callum MacLean from Callum MacPherson in South Uist in 1959. But Finlay J prefaced his transcription of the story by saying that his version was from Lachlan MacLeod from Barra, who is now living in Glasgow, that I heard this humorous story, and I've put it down on paper exactly as he told it. And it bears very considerable similarities to the Johana and the Callum MacPherson version, except that the victim of the murder was not a packman or a trader who had tricked the young man, but the estate agent, the Mhairi, who was coming to collect rent. And I thought this was a very interesting variant because it situates the story in a particular time and place at a time when, of course, the depredations inflicted by the Mhairi on the Highland population were keenly remembered. So I think that it shows two things. First of all, Finlay J's interest in the humorous, but also we've heard of his many talents from Petra, which all of you who are listening tonight will be familiar with. But he was also a collector of material from the oral tradition, things that struck him as important. And I might add that there's a version of this in Scots as well, of this particular story, as told by Jeannie Robertson in Tocher 6. But like the version that Finlay J took down, the person who was murdered was an estate agent, again tying it in with history that would have been remembered and felt by people of the Hebrides and other parts of the Highlands, as well as other parts of rural Scotland. So I'll conclude my presentation on that note, but I'd just like to repeat my assertion that I think Finlay J was a gifted writer of Gaelic humour, who in some ways was typical of the tradition, but was also an innovator. The only pity is that there wasn't more humorous writing, but given the context of an extremely busy and successful life, we have to be thankful for what we have. I'll leave it at that, Petra.
Thank you so much, Rob. Mila, thank. I think we all learned a lot from the talk, and I think it's a wonderful introduction to what follows. As you said, humor is something that connects all the strands of MacDonald's work. So many thanks for that, and I'm sure there will be comments and questions as we get to the general discussion. But now I would like to introduce our second speaker tonight. Mhairi Brennan, who is based at Aston University. Mhairi is a writer, researcher, and lecturer in television studies. Her first monograph, Archiving the Referendum, BBC Scotland's Television Archive, and the 2014 Scottish Independence Referendum, will be published by Palgrave Macmillan in January 2026. So that's all very exciting, and we look forward to seeing that very much. And tonight, Mhairi will use her expertise to discuss the documentaries Finlay J. MacDonald made for BBC Scotland in the 1960s. So please, over to you, Mhairi.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk to you about Finlay J's documentaries tonight. As we are all aware, Finlay J, we're aware of him as a poet, a writer and a broadcaster, but his television documentaries made whilst working at BBC Scotland in the 60s, and as Petra said, he became the head of documentaries in 1969, are perhaps less well known. And I first came across his documentaries whilst working as an archive producer at BBC Scotland. I was struck by their unique content and cinematic qualities, and Kathleen recently told me that Finlay J was called Fellini MacDonald by his colleagues at the BBC, which I thought was really fitting. In July this year, as part of the celebrations of the centenary of his birth, Finlay's family, in association with BBC Alba, showed some of his films in Lewis and Harris. So we had screenings at An Lantair of Sulscar, for which he wrote the script, I believe, about the work of Gugger hunters in Ness. We also showed A Song of Crottle and White, made in 1969 and featuring the Macdonald sisters singing group, as they tell the story of the island through the process of making Harris Tweed. And we have one Macdonald sister here tonight, Kathleen, and the son of another Macdonald sister, Peter Clive, representing Peggy MacDonald, now Clive. A Song of Crottle and White was the first colour programme, I believe, made for BBC Scotland, and seeing it on the big screen was breathtaking. I'm going to try and play a clip of it for you, and it is beautiful. It's a delight. In Tarbert Community Centre, we had screenings of Northern Lights, made in 1969, which was about the lives of lighthouse keepers along the coast of Scotland, and A Boy in Harris, made in 1966, which was MacDonald's love letter to Scarrister, and it also about the only boy living there at the time. Although BBC Alba has made Anjou catch-up documentaries of A Song of Crottle and White in 2009 and A Boy in Harris in 2011, catching up with the MacDonald sisters and with Donnie McSween, who was the boy in Harris, many of MacDonald's films have not been shown since their first broadcast. And we were very lucky that BBC Alba released a selection of them on iPlayer for a month this summer as part of the centenary celebrations. And if you missed them, perhaps you might think about writing to BBC Alba and asking them to put them on indefinitely, because they are astonishing, I think. While I was researching MacDonald's documentaries for an article I wrote for The Druth, an arts journal based in Scotland, I talked to Ken Macquarie and Donalda McKinnon, both ex-heads of BBC Scotland, about their memories of him. They remembered Finlay J as a deeply thoughtful man, full of warmth and humour, proud of his country and interested in the stories of everyone he met. MacDonald's fascination with Scottish identity permeates his work. He realised that certain parts of Scotland were as much of a mystery to the rest of the country as they were to the outside world, so he aimed to introduce the Highlands and Islands to the city folk and vice versa. He turned his poet's eye to the camera lens, filming lighthouse keepers, town planners, Gaelic pop stars, crofters, Saturday shoppers, and itinerant workers, his lyrical style finding poetry in their everyday lives. Described by Macquarie as an avid listener and observer with a passion for storytelling, MacDonald's desire to share his experiences with as wide an audience as possible was behind his decision to write these programmes in English. But although he wanted to educate the nation about the reality of Scottish life, MacDonald's films are not didactic. While that other famous Scottish documentary maker, John Grierson, claimed that a film should be a pulpit to preach from, MacDonald's tone is more inclusive and welcoming. His films are a conversation, not a lesson. MacDonald often provided the voiceovers to his films, and the ease with which he could paint a picture with words lent a warmth and lyricism to his work. But he also understood instinctively when to pause, to let the story breathe. Silence in his films is used as eloquently as a spoken word. And if you'd like to know more about some of his films, such as Northern Lights, Suliscar, The Corncrake and the Croft, which is about crofting in Uig, I think, Escape from the Concrete Jungle, or Travelling Folks, about the lives of itinerant workers in Perthshire, you can read about them on the website that Finlay Jr. has set up, which I realise I haven't put on the slide, but I will put into the chat. But I'd like to focus on 3 documentaries tonight, which I think speak to Finlay J, the poet, the visual poet. So the first is called Glasgow, This Is My City, which was part of a series of films MacDonald made called Poets' Places. So these were kind of symphony films about Scotland. I say symphony because they're music and images. So sadly, most of the episodes of Poets' Places have disappeared from the BBC archives, but I found 3 focusing on Glasgow, the Borders and Tayside. And they're examples, I think, of the delight that MacDonald took in pushing boundaries in order to elevate social observation to an art form, with their careful positioning of music and poetry over a patchwork of images of daily life. To me, the films are reminiscent of the GPO classic Night Mail or Humphrey Jennings' symphony film Listen to Britain. Inspired by the Scottish Renaissance literary movement of the 20s and 30s, which explored notions of modernity and the celebration of the Scots language, MacDonald took his camera around a different part of Scotland for each episode, creating a montage of images showcasing a day in the life of its citizens. There's no commentator, no interviewer. Instead, the soundtrack is a poem written about each place. So, for example, Hugh MacDermott sings the praises of the Borders, while the Glaswegian poet Tom Wright praises his city. And because even though I teach at Aston, I research at Aston, I live in Glasgow, I'm going to try and show you a clip from This Is My City, This Is My Story. If you would not mind being patient, I will bring it up. Sorry for the awful noise. Can we all see that? Petra, could you tell me if you could see that?
Yes, perfect.
I ain't begging.
Can you hear it?
Big town, boom.
Yes, we can.
Falling town. Not a front parlour, but a living room. I can put my feet up here. Barbarous town. But suddenly beautiful, if you're alive to sudden beauty. Not the artifice of a town planner, nor the set piece poised on its pedestal.
So I'll stop right
An
there.
anarchy of sky.
Just to give you a flavour, because what I loved was the generosity of MacDonald's style to make a visual poem out of other poets' works. And throughout that programme, Poets' Places, in that programme in particular, I love the way the camera lens writes a poem, either hanging out the window of a car, driving past Southside villas or Gorbal slums or high flat building sites, or handheld getting up close and personal at a football match, Ibrox actually, a Rangers match. Or as we saw in the opening sequence, just watching the world go by in George Square in Glasgow. So MacDonald poured his life into his work, weaving his experiences into the fabric of his films. And I think that nowhere is this more apparent than in his I'm going to call them masterpieces, his Hebridean masterpieces, A Boy in Harris and A Song of Crottle and White. His most autobiographical work, A Boy in Harris, is a portrait of life in the tiny village of Scarrister on the southernmost tip of Harris. I've written all this down because I'm so nervous about presenting this in front of the family. The boy, Donny, is the only school child in the village, and the film documents the loneliness and the companionship that rub shoulder to shoulder in such an isolated area. Donny is introduced to us sitting on the beach, staring out to sea. He takes up the narrative, recounting his daily routine along with his hopes and ambitions, but the story also belongs to Macdonald, because Donny lives next door to the tiny home where Macdonald grew up. And the beach where he searches for cockles is where the young Macdonald looked out to sea, dreaming of the world. Donny bears the weight of their shared history. So if you could bear with me again, I am going to show you the opening clip.
The boy looks west. If he could sail straight out into that sunset and keep going, he would ultimately make landfall somewhere in Nova Scotia. Someday he may sail west or east, but meantime his physical boundaries are the sea and the mountains of his Atlantic village. He is a boy of this year, but he is a product of this place. He is a distillation of many boys who walked this beach before him, of fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers who went before them. Today he walks alone. He is the only schoolboy in the village of Scarrister, and apart from one child of 3, there is nobody near his own age. He lives on the croft which his grandfather acquired almost 40 years ago, when a large, lush estate was divided into 8 crofts for the land-hungry men who had come back from the First World War. 8 men, 8 crofts, a new village. 12 years ago, he would have walked 5 minutes to his village school, passing on the way other croft houses from which other boys once went to that same school. But they're now men, and long since away. And in the name of economy, progress, and centralization, the village school is now closed. Today's boy learns young to commute. His day is longer than that of the boys who went before him, and it starts earlier.
Every morning at 8 o'clock, my mother or my granny wakens me. I get up and wash myself. I wash my face and give my neck a good scrubbing. Now I am ready for my breakfast, and that's always tasty. When that is done, I wait for the bus. The bus comes and I go into it. In it there are Dina McLennan, Catherine MacLeod, Edward McLennan, Maud McLennan, and Angus John McCucker. Sometimes I sit beside Maud McLennan and I talk about what we have heard on the football and what was on the television.
So I'll stop that there. Take us back into the presentation. And I don't know what I can say about the film that Finlay J didn't. How can I top what his narrative in that film? It's so beautiful. And I love that Donny, he reminds us that Donny is just doing everything that all the children do across Scotland, talking about the football and the television, some on the tip of the most remote part of Harris. And throughout the film, wide-angled lenses and crisp black and white photography highlight the smallness and solitariness of the boy against the wide open spaces and huge skies of Harris. The pace is meditative as he milks the cows and wanders the beach. But Macdonald sees the modern age creeping into the island and charts the beginning of the end for the old way of life. In a later scene, cross-cut with the traditional Gaelic psalms chanted in a tiny church, is the sound of the neighbour's television, which Donnie is occasionally allowed to watch. He gazes entranced at the screen and the world beyond the island. And I had some trouble making the clips, but there is a fantastic scene when Donnie is walking down the high street in Tarbert village, and MacDonald's voiceover says, this is his metropolis, preparing him for perhaps Paris, New York, or Stornoway. At the end of the film, Donnie tells us he'd like to be a teacher and come back to Harris. Who knows, boy from Harris, responds MacDonald's voiceover. In the future, he says, it may be easier and more convenient to dream of the sunset rather than to look at it. A Song of Crottle and White is a geographical, emotional and visual counterpoint to A Boy in Harris. Set across the mountains from Harris in Lewis, this film follows the return to the island of the MacDonald sisters. The sumptuous yellows, greens, reds and blues of the landscape give a joyful aspect to the film, which records for posterity the traditional methods by which Harris tweed is made. There is joy too in the voices of the MacDonald sisters, a Gaelic singing group from Lewis, who at the time were finding international success with their modern rearrangements of traditional songs. And let's hear it for the MacDonald sisters. Now, again, forgive me, I'm going to have to try and cue it up. Bear with me.
Again, machinery and science have taken over and have taken the backbreak out of work. And yet again, machines have taken the music out of the Lewisman's life. Of all the tweed processes, the finishing or walking, spelled W-A-U-L-K, produce most of the songs.
And if I may, I'm going to show you what I think is the coolest ever image I've seen. It's the fabulous MacDonald sisters driving along Lewis. And there we have Kathleen MacDonald. Wonderful. I'm going to rewind that a little bit. Apologies, I couldn't quite make the clips work, so I'm having to do it from the main film. So I think we'll leave it there. So I think we'll leave that there. And can we just all agree that the MacDonald sisters were cool? And again, thank you, Kathleen, for being here tonight. One of the MacDonald sisters, the lead MacDonald sister, and also to Peter, son of Peggy Clive, who was one of the MacDonald sisters. And from those beautiful songs, we can see that the MacDonald sisters' voices were an integral part of the film. Their songs accompanying each step of making tweed. By the 1960s, the traditional methods of making tweed were dying out as factories moved in, but in A Song of Crottle and White, fresh life is breathed into both the fabric and the music as the MacDonald sisters revisit the traditional methods of making tweed from start to finish. The songs are the story of the cloth, reflecting the scrape of the paddles that tease the wool into yarn, the rhythm of the shuttle working back and forth, and the clatter of the foot pedals on the weaving looms. The virtuosity of their voices harmonising effortlessly. Their 4 young women have made it big outside the island, but they are singing in delighted harmony as they lovingly complete the cloth they made together, their history, their songs, and their stories woven into its fabric. The relationship between land, sea, and people is also woven into MacDonald's films, and it should be noticed that while he captures the wild beauty and vast spaces of the island and listens to the concerns of the inhabitants about depopulation, he also reminds us that while the islands might be sparsely populated, they're not empty. Everyday life, school, work, church, community is still happening. He foregrounds the close relationship between people, land, and sea on the island. The communities rely on each other and the environment for a living. So here's some stills from both films. In the bottom left-hand corner, that's actually from Northern Lights. We can see the lighthouse men having to get up to the lighthouse by a rope and pulley system, which looks terrifying. We can see peat diggers and cockle diggers, as well as Kathleen digging for the crottal lichen that colours the Harris Tweed. So in conclusion, MacDonald's films capture a moment in time, but they're timeless too. And they're also modern in their concerns about housing, work, the emptying of the islands, and the future. Today, island life is changing with incomers, super cruisers, and the Hebridean windrush with the new windmill, with the new wind farms. And I believe even Stornoway Tesco is now open on the Sabbath. I'd like to think that if Finlay J was around today, he'd be ready, waiting with his pen and his camera to document the next part, the next chapter in the island story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mhairi. I think that was a wonderful contribution. Lovely to see the extracts from the films, and I think that we can all just hope that because of the centenary, they will be much more widely shown, appreciated, and discussed again. So many thanks for that, and we will have space for comments, responses, and a general discussion at the end. And now, if you permit me, it's my turn. So I will just go back to the slideshow. Just to introduce myself, my name is Petra Johana Poncarová. I'm based at Charles University in Prague. And for many years, my main interest has been Scottish Gaelic fiction and literature in general in the 20th century. And I have been researching a number of figures connected with the magazine Gerem, starting with Derek Thompson himself. And it was through Gerem that I became interested in the Gaelic writing of Finlay J. MacDonald as well. I'm not an expert on Gaelic drama, and in that respect, I would always defer to the expertise of colleagues such as Michelle MacLeod from the University of Aberdeen, and she has done amazing research in the field. But recently, I have come across a number of interesting points concerning Finlay J. MacDonald and drama. And since it was such an important interest of his, I felt it should not be missing from this event. So I will just try to share these observations with you. Finlay J. MacDonald was active in both Gaelic and English. He was adapting texts as radio plays, he was producing plays, he was involved in organizing drama festivals, he was translating drama, and he was also writing about it in the form of columns and reviews. And I will say more about all these points in my 10 minutes. An important source of information has been Donald John MacLeod's dissertation on 20th century Gaelic literature, defended at the University of Glasgow under the supervision of Derek Thompson. It is a wonderful source of information, so I just want to acknowledge my grateful debt to it, and I will be referring to it throughout. First, I wanted to point out the dramatic elements in Finlay J. MacDonald's fiction. Rob, in his talk, mentioned his writing for An Cabernet, and I think it's really interesting to observe him assuming voices for these humoristic columns written in the form of letters. We have also mentioned two short stories which are written in the first person, but are not autobiographical, Am Basar and Am Shalach. And in these, he assumes voices of women characters. And I think that these dramatic inclinations illustrate that he had a tremendous knack for drama, and I will illustrate this interest further. We mentioned his involvement in the BBC. And at the start of his career, he was adapting novels and plays for the BBC. We come back to this profile of MacDonald written for Gaelic by Iain MacDhòmhnaill, and this is what it says about the beginnings of Finlay J's career. To begin with, he was producing drama in Great Stories of the World, but he says himself that people did not take to it at all, for he was flying far too high for the listeners. Afterwards, he went for music and foolery, variety, and he brought more curses upon himself, for it was far too low. There was nothing to it again, but a half and half, and apparently that pleased everybody. And I think we can detect MacDonald's own tone in this piece and his characteristic sense of humor. But more seriously, as Donald John MacLeod pointed out, the BBC, besides broadcasting performances of all the worthwhile Gaelic plays, along with many simple popular comedies, have broadcast translations of plays by Marlowe, Chekhov, Robert McClellan, and Neil Gunn. If there is a growing popular realization that plays can be edifying literature and also entertaining in performance, the BBC are due a large deal of the credit. This is MacLeod writing at the end of the 1960s. And I think we can safely say that MacDonald was heavily involved in these initiatives. And I think it would be really interesting to find out the details of his involvement. We know for certain that he adapted Neil Gunn's The Highland River very successfully. Apparently, Neil Gunn himself was very impressed with the adaptation, and Sidney Goodsir-Smith's The Wallace for the radio. So this is coming back to the contacts with Sidney Goodsir-Smith that I mentioned in the introduction. MacDonald was also actually producing plays in theatres, and I was really struck by this reference. This is again from the work of Donald John MacLeod. The first stage performance of a Gaelic non-comedy that I can trace is that of Donald Sinclair's Croshtara, produced by Finlay J. MacDonald in the Athenaeum Theatre in 1947, said to be the only performance of a Gaelic play in a fully fledged theatre since Mhairi in the Athenaeum in 1921. Access was had to costumes and the theatre's lighting and staging facilities. All these were used competently. I would dearly like to find out more about this particular production. Just a footnote about the play itself. It is a piece of serious drama set in the momentous year of 1745. It has Charles Edward Stewart, Aston, Alastair, and other historical figures as characters. And it was written by the innovative Gaelic playwright, poet, and also prose writer Donald Sinclair, Dol Machnachartich, and it was first published in the quarterly magazine Gunabliana, run by Rory Erskine of Mar, and his magazines were an important source of inspiration for Finlay J. MacDonald and Derek Thompson when they were setting up Garum, as they acknowledged themselves. So I don't know whether we will ever have access to those, whether anything has survived, but I think it would be really thrilling to see if there are any pictures from this particular production. And I think it's remarkable to see that in the mid-1940s, right after the war, Finlay J. MacDonald was trying to make this serious and experimental piece of Gaelic drama available again to contemporary audiences. Donald John MacLeod also mentions a Gaelic translation of Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, translated by Lachlan McKinnon and directed by Finlay J. MacDonald. So again, I would very much like to find out more about this translation and about MacDonald's involvement in the production. Another remarkable piece of information from Donald John MacLeod is a reference to a very different production. So in 1949, Finlay J. MacDonald and Alexander Mackenzie presented a pantomime cum satirical revue, Whiskers Galore, in the Lyric Theatre, a very up-to-date and lively venture which drew large audiences and was composed of new songs, impersonations, and sketches. F.E. Morrison wrote the lyrics, and Pat Sandeman was musical director. This was largely in English, but it dealt with Highland subjects. If ever I get hold of a time machine, I would dearly like to transport myself back to 1949 and go and see Whiskers Galore. Alas, I don't think there is a recording available, but I think it would be great to have a look around the archives and see if there's anything at all that has survived about this particular venture. I mentioned that MacDonald was involved in setting up and organizing Gaelic drama festivals. So in 1956, when Gaelic Drama Association was set up in Glasgow, and it went on to organize 11 consecutive annual festivals by 1969, MacDonald was an important force behind this initiative. In 1957, the first Gaelic Drama Festival of one-act plays was held in Glasgow. So MacDonald was again very much involved in that. But as Donald John MacLeod notes, he later detached himself from these initiatives. This is MacLeod writing in 1969, and as we can see from the quote below, he was not impressed with all the efforts in Gaelic drama, nor with the responses of audiences. So a reviewer, possibly Finlay J. MacDonald, writing for the magazine Gael, points out that some members of the audience suffered from the delusion that every play on the stage, every action is meant to be laughed at. Parts of Andul, a grim and tragic play, were quite spoiled, for some at least of the audience, by the determination of others in the audience to guffaw at the wrong time, expecting every Gaelic play to be kitchen sink. So I think, here we see an interesting contrast. We know, and Rob illustrated that in his talk, that MacDonald was a wonderful representative of humor in Gaelic literature and culture, but he also wanted to support and promote serious drama, as we saw from his involvement in a new production of Donald Sinclair's Krushtara, and we get another proof of that from this review. When I was going through the scrapbooks of Ian Moffat-Pender, who was a Gaelic learner, writer, editor, and activist, I came across these newspaper cuttings. So at the moment, I'm not sure where these come from. I would like to search the British Newspaper Archive for that. But they provide us with a glimpse of Finlay J. MacDonald's involvement in Gaelic drama festivals. So the first one, Uist and Bara Players Win, mentions that this group of actors presented Finlay J. MacDonald's translation of Love Lingers on Wednesday night. The other one mentions that Finlay J. MacDonald served as the adjudicator who praised the high standard of acting throughout the festival. And again, from the same collection, the scrapbooks of Ian Moffat-Pender, we have these programs from the Gaelic Drama Festival in Glasgow in 1959. And on the left, we see the list of parts and actors for Finlay J. MacDonald's translation of a play by Gordon White, Loughlingers On, in Gaelic, Antúraí Attalach. And on the right, we see in the list of trophies that the producer's trophy was given by Mr. and Mrs. Finlay J. MacDonald. So again, I would love to find out more, but these precious period documents show us Finlay J. MacDonald's personal involvement in these events and in supporting new Gaelic drama of all kinds. His translation of this one-act play by Gordon White was published by Uncommon Gaelic. As you can see on the slide, we are not entirely sure about the publication date. It's likely to be 1942, so very early on, and a copy has survived. I think probably more copies, but one is definitely available in the library of Glasgow University. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity to see Finlay J. MacDonald in action as a translator and as a supporter of Gaelic drama. Lastly, he was also writing about drama in Gaelic. These pieces include reviews in Gaelic of plays and of literature concerning drama. So he reviewed the works of the Scottish playwright Robert Kemp, who was born in Orkney and was active in Edinburgh and in Glasgow. He also wrote a delightful review of a memoir by Micheál Mac Liamóil, Irish actor, translator, an activist, impresario, co-founder of the Gate Theatre, Each Actor on His Ass. And you can see that there is a strong affinity between Finlay J. MacDonald and Mac Liamóir in terms of interest in drama and promoting international impulses in Irish drama and in Scottish Gaelic drama, respectively. Drama was also a subject recurring in Gaelic editorials co-written by Derek Thompson and Finlay J. Quite often they would discuss the underused potential of drama for the Gaelic revival. The editorial where this comes forth very strongly appeared in Gaelic 15 in 1956. In this editorial, Thompson and MacDonald refer back to a biting but very insightful essay by Hector McIver, Uisce Beha agus Uisce Bash, which appeared in the already mentioned bilingual anthology Alaba in 1948, and it criticizes the focus given to the mode and to singing competitions at the expense of promoting drama in Gaelic. Finally, when going through Finlay J's pieces for Weekly Scotsman, I came across a very short article from 1959 where he relates his impressions from a production he attended at the Bio Theatre in St Andrews, and he knows that such a small and simple theatre could be, and indeed should be, in every Highland town, and that it should produce a wide repertoire, but also Gaelic plays. In terms of further directions in this avenue of research, I think it would be great to trace more information about programs and productions in archives and in the periodical press, possibly to trace scripts and adaptations. And two questions I'm really interested in are whether MacDonald translated more drama apart from Loughlingers On, and I'm very curious whether he ever wrote any original plays himself. I think he certainly had the talent and the inclination, so I think that would be very interesting to see. And I think it's one of the practical points from this seminar. I think it would be absolutely wonderful to organize a new production of Antúraí Attalach, because we actually have the script at our disposal. So thank you very much for listening. And these were just my some of my latest discoveries concerning Finlay J. MacDonald and Gaelic drama. This is the end of our 3 talks. Unfortunately, Thomas McAlpine is not with us tonight, but hopefully we will have a chance to collaborate on the research into Finlay J. MacDonald's works in the future. So I would like to thank the MacDonald family for being with us. I would like to thank Rob Dunbar and Mhairi Brennan for their presentations. And now, with everybody's permission, I'm going to stop the recording.